One of the things that I noticed was the mediocrity that emerges in conversation in response to many common questions. The main one being, how are you? The most common question of the day. Or, are you doing okay? Another common question socially. Or, what did you do? And the first beginning is the awareness that people often ask me mediocre questions, which of course, if I respect the question, lead to a relatively mediocre response. Now, to the question, how are you, for example? In what arena? In business, in health? Are you ranking your vitality? And so what if I say to such an open-ended question that I'm 6 out of 10 on a feeling of aliveness right now? Well, what does someone do with that? And this opened up a whole other field. People would say, how are you doing? And then it turns out, have no time for the answer. But even more disturbingly, discover that they didn't particularly have any plan for what to do with that information. Now, if we go over to another point in this series, the question of intelligence, the efficiency of transforming energy into human well-being, if people are repeatedly spilling out questions that lead them to places that make them nervous because they don't have the time or they don't actually want an answer, they're just automatically opening a door. We then see that a question is the beginning of a quest, the beginning of a journey, and the beginning of a journey towards the direction of the question. It becomes very important to ask questions that take both people in a direction of higher value. If social etiquette is built up on a repeated journey to a place of lower value, then one must, as part of the prison of repetitive culturally sanctioned quests to mediocre terrain, avoid human interaction altogether to escape the mediocrity. And it's very common in United States culture for people to engage in a series of quests into mediocre directions, only to feel overwhelmed, bored, distracted, and to come out the other end saying, "Oh, I couldn't stop that person talking," or I'm so glad to be free of that. I couldn't wait to get out of that. And of course, they've done absolutely nothing proactively to do anything about that. And so it's rather a cruel setup of the cult. And so if we understand that a question is a quest, and that every quest leads in a different direction, then one of the most empowering and intelligent things that we can do is master the art of the quest in such a way as to lead towards peak value for multiple people. This means, of course, if you want to escape the vortice of a mediocre cult, you've got to break the cult taboos. So if someone asks me, how are you doing? I might suggest a counter quest. I can make them do the work, but 90% of people in this cult are not going to do that work well. They haven't done their preparation to guide the interaction in an intelligent way. And so I can push it back on them. Well, what would you like to know? What would be really valuable to hear in response to the question, how am I doing? And how much of an answer would you like? Well, usually that's too much thinking for someone in this cult. And so they're like, well, are you okay? And they're not really enjoying that. And they just avoid the question and avoid social interaction in the future. So that can be pivoted around by saying, well, would you like to hear the most interesting parts of my life? Would you like to hear the most intense emotional things going on with an intention of healing and amplifying and integrating those? Would you like to learn something that would help you grow in an area that you're wanting to grow? Where are you trying to grow right now? And so this is inviting a stepping out of the cult terrain into more valuable terrain. But even that is somewhat limited because not everyone knows how to grasp those tools in the moment. So in this terrain, I might also pivot the question myself and answer a question that might lead to more valuable terrain. I might say, well, what seems most interesting to me to talk about is how could we create value together? And so if you'd like to make time for that, we could explore value together. And that will filter the wheat from the chaff in terms of if someone doesn't want to take responsibility to own their ability to create value, well, they'll wander off into some terrain where they can be invisible, which is quite easy and a natural state within our cult. But if someone lights up around that, now you've got the time that you've spent taking you to valuable terrain. And even better, to master the art of stepping through quests with strangers, with friends, with lovers, that will take us into potent, rich terrains. And so sitting down at a cafe table, I might say, what is the most rich area of learning and growing if you want to talk about that in your life right now? And that's going to be a very valuable and interesting conversation. I'm going to get to know them. I'm going to give them bandwidth in which to integrate that terrain, which they'll have with an active listener. And simultaneously, I might learn something from them about what they're going through and why, etc. And so I developed a series of 15 or so questions that led consistently, 80+% of the time, into interesting terrain. And I'll often initiate an interaction with one of those quests, one of those questions. Have you had any peak experiences recently? What was the peak experience? What made it a peak experience? And is there a way to create more of that with you? What is the thing that you'd most like to do before you die? If that's in your radar. Or, what's the most enjoyable location for you to visit, in your lifescape and, in a 2 or 3 year period? Where's the sweet spot that if you go to this location and do this thing, it's one of your peak experiences in a 3 year period? Where is that location and what makes that rich for you? Well, if they describe something and I understand what it is about that location that's really stunning for them, then I might remember some of the locations that I've been to that might provide a similar experience for them. And say, have you been to this place? And what's different about this place than your place is this. So the goal is to create value. The goal is to create consciousness. The goal is to utilize time to create well-being. Now, this is much more important early on in a relationship because you're still learning what the other person's hierarchy of values are. You're learning what their priorities are. You're learning the nuances of what make them happy and what make them miserable, what make them, overstimulated versus bored, and where is that sweet spot in the middle. So at the beginning of the relationship, there's a great need for structured knowledge so that this can be internalized, and the more spontaneous interactions that our culture likes to lead with can be based on informed knowledge. What I mean by that is if I spontaneously say, how about this, and don't know anything about you or your situations, statistically speaking, from just pure chance, there's a high odds that I'm going to suggest something that is the opposite of where you need to be going. And so it's spontaneity, but it's not informed, it's not educated. If, on the other hand, I begin with knowing a lot of core values, a lot of core traits, what pisses you off, what makes you feel great, and we map that out through the quest of information, nuanced, vulnerable, transparent information, then after perhaps a month of somewhat structurally navigating around you, or a week or 3 or 4 hours, etc., of navigating around you, now I have a sense of your rhythm that's not conscious, that's intuitive, but it's attuned with that conscious backdrop of who you are, as opposed to my unconscious projection of perhaps me or the people that I've met in general, and projecting that on you, which very rarely gels into a peak terrain of value. So having developed this technology to a degree that most of my conversations seem to be, at least 300% more rich and interesting than the cult's sanctioned, hey, how are you, what's going on, and then not tuning most of that out because it's not particularly interesting to me, or having someone else tune what I'm saying out. This is a very, very simple technology to master that increases the odds by a minimum average of 300%. So that's incredible, that you can learn 15 questions. Look at a quick cheat sheet if you need to. And so this led then to a phenomena of various people telling me, wow, what a great question. Oh, that's so interesting. Oh, I've really enjoyed this conversation. And several people said, you should write about that. This is great. And so I sat down and wrote a little book called Amazing Questions. Took a couple of weeks, formalized the process a little bit more, and thus remembered a variety of questions. But the core learning is that every question is a quest. And if it is a quest that is unconsciously populated, regardless of context and regardless of the individual, it's going to be a quest towards mediocrity as a general rule. But if the quest is intentional, if it is consciously formulated in the question of what journey would I like to have with you, more than any other journey, is that a journey into knowing about your bucket list? Is that a journey into understanding your top goals? Is that a journey into what are your biggest problems and what would resolve those problems for you? Is that a journey into what would be fun? What have you really enjoyed recently and why? Or what has meaning for you? These are all questions that lead to journeys, interpersonal journeys, that can be significantly more valuable. So this has been my way of taking this domain of the cult of quests, the cult of questions, and restructuring them to be a little bit more conscious, a little bit more intentional, and as such more valuable. Now this has and ties into a larger theme, which is that as a general rule, everything that one makes unconscious that has been handed to one as a tradition, as a cult, everything that is taken from the unconscious terrain and first made conscious and then redesigned to be more in tune with us as individuals is going to significantly increase the intelligent quotient, the efficiency of transforming energy into human well-being.